This is YR, Women in AI Research. In this EACL 2026 series, I'm speaking with authors of accepted papers to break down their work and the ideas behind it. Let's dive in. Could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you. My name is Angana Borah. I'm a third year PhD candidate at the University of Michigan, working with Dr. Radha Mihilshia. I mostly work on understanding large language model behaviors in multi agent systems, taking inspiration from interdisciplinary studies such as social psychology and cognitive sciences. And using these, I try to understand concepts such as misinformation, propagation, biases, etc.
Sounds amazing. And I know that you have this paper accepted to EACL main conference this year, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so could you please walk me through the paper?
Sure, definitely. Our paper is called Persuasion at Play Understanding Misinformation Dynamics in Demographic Aware Human LLM Interactions. So, the motivation for this is that misinformation exposure and susceptibility can vary widely across demographic groups. And LLMs also add a new dimension to this because of their persuasion abilities. It has been seen in previous studies that LLMs can manipulate users either positively or negatively and also show deceptive abilities. So we wanted to really see how this bidirectional interplay of LLMs and humans touch upon this concept of misinformation propagation. So here is our bidirectional framework where we have LLM to human persuasion. Basically, we use an LLM to generate persuasive texts given a claim, a text that supports the claim and a text that refutes this claim. And then we provide this same claim along with the persuasive texts to humans. And we do this across different demographic groups. We recruit participants through Prolific, around 100 for each demographic group, and we try to see what their beliefs are after this information is provided. After that, we do the vice versa process. Basically, for human to LLM persuasion, we already have data sets that contain persuasive texts from humans supporting and refuting given claims across different social media platforms. There are data sets such as Rumor Eval and Stansosaurus, which contain these claims. So we use these along with the persuasive texts and provide it to the LLM, and then we see how LLM behaves. And we use different data sets for this. For LLM persuasion, we use fake news and rumor eval, and we generate persuasive text by the LLM. And then for human persuasion, we already have data sets available, which we use for our experiments. We use different demographic groups such as gender, age, and geographical backgrounds. For example, if a person belongs to a rural or urban area. And finally, for evaluation of persuasive effects, we look at the correctness rates. Basically, how correctly can a human or an LLM determine if the claim is true or false when the persuasive texts are provided along with. So here are some brief results for our bidirectional persuasion. So this is the plot for a human correctness, basically when LLM persuasion is provided. And the bars are basically when persuasion is provided, and the dots are when persuasion is not provided. And it is quite clear that humans are often persuaded in the wrong direction when persuasion is provided, since the correctness rates of these dots are quite higher than the bars that we see here. But we do see some patterns, such as rural, older, and female participants have lower correctness rates. Here, for rural and older participants, there have been a lot of studies which show that these demographics are indeed more susceptible to misinformation. For gender based studies, there are mixed results. So we it's not really corroborated with existing results. For human to LLM persuasion, here are these results. We look at three LLMs, GPT, Quen, and Llama, and then we similarly look at no persuasion and persuasion effects. So here we see for this rumor eval data set, we almost see that with persuasion, the correctness rates are quite higher. showing that if human persuasive texts are provided, the LLMs are better able to determine if information is true or false. This holds for rumor eval, however, it does not really for Stansosaurus. One reason we think this might be is because Stansosaurus only consists of solely misinformative texts and can also be sometimes very extreme, showing why the newer models perform really well in determining true or false informations here. Uh, Moving forward, therefore, we just look at rumor eval since we want to look at the effects of persuasion on LLMs. Across these models, we see that GPT-35 Turbo is really stable across data sets. So we wanted to look at pointwise correlation of human outputs versus GPT-35 Turbo outputs. And we do see the correlation is quite decent of 0.41. And also we see the patterns emerging, like how younger versus older and urban versus rural, there are different correctness rates, also aligning with previous human studies. So
And
this is part.
sorry, in this rather plot, when you compare GPT-35 Turbo with the humans, you compare them based on the accuracy, right?
Yes,
Or
yes, right.
right, it's
Yeah.
not the text itself, the text that is
Yeah, the
generated by.
persuasive, not the persuasive text. We do some analysis on the persuasive text as well. I guess here are the
Mhm.
results for this, like human and LLM persuasive texts. And we look at type token ratio, readability, and some loop variables, which are socio-psycho variables that are used as markers of persuasion. For example, emotional appeal, credibility, logical structure, etc. And we look at the texts that humans produce versus LLM persuasive texts. And we often see, like, in terms of only these linguistic metrics, LLMs kind of score higher on average, showing LLMs may have better persuasive qualities in terms of like misinformative context than humans, which also show how they could be also possibly used in like intervention methods later.
Interesting.
Yeah. And yeah, those that was like the first part of our study. We also looked at another part where we were trying to see if LLM agents show misinformation centric behavior. Basically, these days we see a lot of LLMs involved in multi-agent interactions, and there have been known to have like higher coordination or showing more emergent behavior. So we wanted to see if misinformative group dynamics such as echo chambers are also shown by the LLMs. So here too, we look at the effects of persuasion during interaction. However, we introduce two more variables into the mix. Basically, we look at homogeneous versus heterogeneous groups. Basically, having LLM agents from the same demographic group versus a different demographic group. And we wanted to see if homogeneous group, when they contain agents from the same group, they tend to increase the propagation of misinformation or not. So that was the goal of this set of experiments, to just see how LLM interaction may also increase like misinformation propagation. So the results for this section were also quite interesting and also intuitive. Basically, when LLM persuasion was provided, we see the correctness rates of LLMs increasing after like interaction. However, when human persuasion was provided, the LLM like correctness decreased. So here del CR is basically the last interaction correctness versus first. So we see different effects when LLM persuasion and human persuasion is provided. Moreover, we see differences in homogeneous and heterogeneous groups. So here, homogeneous are in like the slanted bars, and homogeneous are in the horizontal bars, and heterogeneous in slanted bars and darker ones. So we do see correctness rates kind of here for homogeneous groups are lower, which shows how homogeneous groups can lead to more propagation of like misinformation in a group, which is also analogous to what we see in human groups when humans are in a group consisting of similar individuals with similar demographics, there is higher trust. If a misinformation is shared, there's more susceptibility to that because of this higher trust. We do have some outliers here. Here, females, and even for here, we have rurals. And yeah, so this were like the experiments that we did, and basically these were like the main learnings in our study. So we did see how LLMs as demographic models could show some promise as tools for understanding these differences in the future. And we actually also recently submitted a paper on how we could use LLMs to simulate these susceptibility behaviors across different demographic groups, not just looking at persuasion, but also looking at the susceptibility of models. And then we do see that human LLM persuasion can have varied effects. And this also is helpful because in the future, we may be able to use LLMs as an effective intervention tool, like we saw here with LLM persuasion, kind of the correctness rates increased. So they could have some potential of being used as intervention tools, with some also cautions about not being used in a wrong negative persuasion manner. And finally, we do see some emergent behaviors in terms of echo chambers. And I think this is also very interesting since multi agents, they are being used in several different domains these days. So it'll be nice to also be cautious about how we want to use these models.
Thank you. That's a very interesting work, and I really enjoyed the presentation. What are your thoughts on multi-turn, uh, on the potential of multi-turn persuasion?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting idea, and I guess it has a lot of potential, like a lot of new findings that we could uncover from that set of experiments. There are already, I think, studies that look at psychophancy and how LLMs, if they're repeatedly asked by a human to behave certain way or like repeatedly critiqued, then the LLM ends up really abiding by the human, right? So I think this could have really great implications into understanding how persuasion can affect in multi-turn conversations. I have not done experiments on this yet, but I believe with repeated misinformative contexts, if the LLM is not very, um, you know, uh, if the LLM is vulnerable to these type of misinformative context, repeatedly saying it will actually make the LLM agree to it, which I think again has safety and ethical implications. So I guess, yeah, I guess that would be a very interesting set of experiments, and I will, I guess, look into it too.
Right. Yeah. And what are your plans for the future work with regards to this paper?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So right now we are looking into like a simulation. Basically, here we did see with GPT-35 Turbo how the correlation was not too bad, like kind of decent with 0.41. So I think the goal right now is to look at understanding if LLMs can actually act as simulators of different demographic groups. That said, it's a very tough problem because there's also a lot of different factors that come into play. So we are looking into belief driven simulations. So not just using like group based, that is demographic level, but also using individual beliefs. So we recently worked on a paper where we tried using beliefs and demographic information to simulate susceptibility of humans. And we achieved quite good like results in for our initial analysis. However, it was on a limited data set, so we do need more rigorous analysis. But I think with this simulation framework, it might be easier to use an LLM and understand which groups may be more susceptible so that we can take necessary steps for intervention of misinformation. It would also reduce costs, I think, significantly that are associated with human studies, large scale ones. I would not say LLMs are a replacement of human studies, but it could be useful for scaling these studies because they could provide like really like a good idea about the distribution of susceptibility that exists. So yeah, I guess in terms of cost and time, it would be really beneficial if we could arrive at a stage where we have like good simulation.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to the future outcomes of the projects that you are doing. Thank you. Links are in the description, both the paper and the author. Like this video and subscribe to the channel to follow this series. See you next time.